Hey everyone. So I know I've been behind schedule with the show lately, and just to let you know up front, yes, unscripted. And I had actually hoped to remedy that this past weekend, get everything back on track, release a new episode every week by Sunday at the latest. And then I ran into yet more tech issues this past weekend. I didn't tell you guys, but I think it was a couple of weeks back. I had been slaving away editing one of those epically long unscripted episodes, and I was approaching the finish line. It was probably an hour and a half at least, something in that ballpark. I plugged all the links, the shameless plugs at the end of each episode, got the outro music ready. And all of a sudden I notice that from beginning to end, the episode was Swiss cheesed with these gaps of silence or these empty spaces. So it looks like I made a tiny adjustment near the end of the recording, and accidentally I must have hit Command A or select all or whatever. So that one little adjustment had a domino effect and just created a bunch of little gaps, many of them actually cutting into my talking. So I had to go all the way back to the beginning and one by one tweak every little edit all over again. Then this past weekend, yesterday I woke up bright and early. I said I'm going to catch up, make a video version of the last episode, and then move on to recording the new episode. And I have a very kind of fickle and fidgety refurbished MacBook Pro. It's a 2016 model. It's refurbished, but I bought it directly from Apple. And I probably should have taken advantage of the warranty while I had the chance, because pretty much from the get-go, it had that sticky key problem, where the left shift key only works when it feels like it, and it appears to be more of a software issue than a hardware issue. And on top of that, it started crashing more and more after I upgraded to Catalina, started crashing even more. So, it crashed once again overnight, Saturday night. So I wake up Sunday, sit down to start working on the podcast, and I see that I no longer had a desktop. Not only were all the files and folders missing from the desktop, but when you went into Finder, there was a generic missing, folder or item symbol. And when you clicked on it, it basically said that the original item could not be found. And you couldn't drag items on the desktop because the desktop no longer existed. You could see the wallpaper, but as far as Finder and the operating system were concerned, the desktop did not exist. It was no longer a thing. Tried, unsyncing, checking off iCloud and seeing if that fixed it, because that can sometimes, if you sync your desktop to iCloud, it can kind of cause a thing where your desktop gets wiped, or at least the folders and the files temporarily disappear. But I wasn't that lucky. It's something worse than that. So I tried to reinstall the operating system. That didn't work. I went into the disk utility app, and it basically said there was a problem with the computer's hard drive, technically a flash drive since it's a newer MacBook. And it basically warned you, the ship's going down, man. Back up what you can, So I ordered an external drive from Amazon. I'm waiting for it to show up. I'm going to back everything up to, using Time Capsule or whatever the heck it's called. And then I'm just going to wipe the whole disk and repartition it and see if that works, or if, the thing's going to have to be shipped off to be repaired. So that's a thing. And did I call it time capsule? It's time machine. Anyway, moving on. So yeah, so I started scripting an episode, and I was feeling the pressure, crunch time. I was going to try get the scripted episode finished by tonight and try to quickly, knock the episode out before I have to go to bed and wake up for work tomorrow. Because I made a liar out of myself. I said I hope to get the next episode out by, Sunday night. Well, I guess I never promised it would get out. I said I hoped. But obviously that didn't happen. So as I was working on the script, I decided to kind of take a break, check out YouTube, and I see that there's a recommended, secular talk video, a Kyle Kalinske video in my feed. And it just stopped me in my tracks. It says, or it was entitled, R.I.P. Michael Brooks, or something to that effect. And I'm like, what? And I guess I was just hoping that it wasn't true, or, my brain was trying to make sense of it. And I thought, oh, maybe it's meant to be sarcastic, like he was wrecked, using a online vernacular. You know what I mean? That didn't make sense because Michael and Kyle were friends, and he wouldn't have been sarcastic like that towards him. Unless he was being sarcastic in the sense that he was saying that maybe Michael's detractors thought that they had wrecked or owned him. And, Kyle was going to walk us through how they were actually wrong and they hadn't, or something like that. So I click on the video, start watching it, and yes, it turns out that Michael Brooks has passed away. And the news must have broke recently. I'm recording this at 10:22 p.m. on a Monday night. It's July 20th. And I'm noticing videos on this subject popping up here and there, and they all seem to have been published within the last hour or so. So, yeah, it must be pretty recent news. And so my take on Michael Brooks is kind of complicated. Back when I was first getting into not publishing my own podcast, but just when I began listening to podcasts, I think some of the first podcasts I ever downloaded or subscribed to were TYT, Skeptoid, with Brian Dunning, and The Majority Report with Sam Cedar. And, of course, Michael Brooks was a part of the Majority Report. And I really liked The Majority Report when I first, got in the podcast. I used to listen to it all the time. And then I kind of fell out of the habit of listening to it, but I would always kind of come back here and there and catch up, check in, etc. And I had actually just recently had started watching the Majority Report on YouTube again, and it was just maybe a few hours ago I was watching a video Sam Cedar had made in response to this kind of back and forth he had with Brett Weinstein on Twitter. And maybe that will make for a good segue, because we all know there's this kind of divide in the online, skeptic or atheist community that seems to have its roots all the way back, in the free thought blogs, PZ Myers, Gamergate era, where there's this fallout over political correctness. You had one side of the divide seemingly, starting to lean more right and kind of sympathize more with people on the right. And, starting to really call out what they saw as excessive political correctness, targeting the what's pejoratively, referred to as the SJW crowd, social justice warriors. And then you had those on the other side of the divide being kind of more, conventionally left leaning, I guess. Although, you had many people still on the other side of the divide, even as they, were trying to combat all this political correctness and whatnot, still identifying as left leaning, as liberal or progressive, even though it started to seem that they were beginning to have more and more in common with the right, in a sense. And it's probably safe to say that I've been an agnostic atheist since at least my teens, even though I didn't have the vocabulary or a familiarity with I just butcher familiar. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it again. With the terminology to actively identify or label myself as such. And once again, if you're not familiar with the jargon, and, agnostic atheism is just kind of a subset of atheism, even though it might sound contradictory. The agnostic portion refers to, not a knowledge claim. I don't claim to know whether or not there actually is a God or an afterlife. But then the atheistic part refers to, belief, even though I don't claim to know with 100% certainty whether those things do or don't exist. I certainly have my doubts, especially when it comes to man-made religion and all that kind of thing, man-made concepts of God. I think that's pretty common. I think probably the great bulk, the majority, and that's probably pretty presumptuous of me to say, of atheists, including many of the high-profile atheists out there, are probably technically agnostic atheists. And so even though that was kind of my worldview for a very long time, I think I first discovered, the writings of the so-called Four Horsemen, Hitchens, Dawkins, Harris, and Daniel Dennett, and discovered their kind of online presence in the form of YouTube debates, atheist versus theist debates, lectures and talks, things like that. I probably didn't discover all that until maybe my late 20s, early 30s, and I felt right away a very strong kinship with these people. And I saw that their worldview pretty much mirrored my worldview. They just were able to express it far more eloquently and were much more knowledgeable than I, you know what I mean? And so ever since then, I've had a fondness for those guys, especially the late Christopher Hitchens. I'm still a Dawkins fan, for lack of a better term, and I would say a Sam Harris fan. I think I did this in the last episode too. I said fan kind of funny because fan, the etymology comes from fanatic, and it kind of denotes a kind of rabid loyalty, or fanatical loyalty to a public figure. And I do notice that even though I still listen to Sam's podcast and I still agree with a lot of what he has to say, I also often find myself disagreeing with him at times, and I find him even being tone deaf on a number of subjects, or at least, one or two subjects. And so I think the reason why Michael Brooks initially kind of rubbed me the wrong way was because of my fondness for Sam Harris. And it's funny, you guys maybe, you might be familiar with Chris Webber or C-Web, a fellow podcaster. I used to be pretty tight with him back in the day, and I still consider him a friend. It's just that we've kind of fallen out of touch. Chris hosted C-Web Sunday School and then moved on to host Paranormal Skeptic Academy. Did I just butcher Academy? Anyway, I think I ran out of air. And we actually very briefly hosted a political show together. But I think we only cranked out one or two episodes before the wheels fell off, But I was a Sam Harris fan and C-Web not so much. So there was some friendly tension there, And I know that Chris is also a longtime fan of Michael Brooks, so I thought of him right away and tweeted at him when I found out about his passing. So, as a Sam Harris fan, I used to be kind of put off by the way Michael Brooks always went after him. And for some reason, his personality also just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But strangely, or not so strangely, I actually found myself warming up to Michael Brooks recently. And I had just been watching him recently, and because of COVID, like a lot of online shows, some people are opting to report from home, and that's what Michael seemed to be doing. He, like myself, had some COVID hair growth, looking kind of shaggy, but otherwise he appeared to be in good health. He was young, I'm not sure of his exact age, but maybe somewhere in his 30s. So this really seemed to come out of nowhere. And just out of respect, I'm not going to speculate about how he might have died. I'm sure the facts, whatever they are, will come out eventually. But I mentioned this whole divide in the skeptic community over political correctness. And I kind of view the whole intellectual dark web thing as being a kind of offshoot or outgrowth of that. You have this group of middle-aged public intellectuals devoted to pushing back against political correctness. And to be honest, I've never really cared about the whole SJW versus anti-SJW thing. It appeals to me as, interesting drama. Sometimes it's fun to break out the popcorn and watch the two sides squabble. But at the end of the day, I couldn't really care less about pronouns and the rest of it. It's fun to watch people get all worked up over pronouns, but I don't really, personally care. It's not what lights my fire. Doors reference. On my show, I'd rather focus on religion, separation of church and state issues, demented evangelicals spouting superstitious nonsense, do my weird little history documentaries, etc. Don't get me wrong, I do sometimes get political, and I know I really have been in the wake of the death of George Floyd and the civil unrest that's followed. And even though I don't affiliate myself with the Democratic Party, I'm still a lefty at the end of the day, a staunch supporter of LGBTQ rights. I believe in a strong social safety net, Bernie Sanders supporter, etc. And I think things like police violence, racism, these are important issues that have to be addressed. And it shouldn't make you, a quote unquote SJW to be against police violence and racism. Holy shit, it should just make you a decent human being. But it's hard for me to get worked up about political correctness. Sometimes political correctness is taken to absurd levels or extremes. Anita Sarkeesian getting offended by Bayonetta's ass or whatever. But it's not what I really dig focusing on. But yeah, I was starting to warm up to Michael Brooks. I definitely enjoyed the way he and Sam Seder mercilessly, went after Dave Rubin. Before I learned of Michael's passing, I planned on doing a news story or topical episode, and one of the topics was going to be Dave Rubin recently going on some right-wing, online show and talking about the importance of religion and how it's necessary for the foundation of a society, shades of Jordan Peterson, that kind of thing. Yeah, but whatever you thought of Michael Brooks, he was a young, intelligent guy with his whole life in front of him, and his passing definitely came as a shock. I guess he'd recently started a new show with Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks, and they were pretty close friends. She responded to his passing, and it was definitely moving, You could tell it really hit her hard, and she was really choking up. I'm going to sound like my father. Whenever someone passes, he angrily says, "That's a shame." And it's a shame. He was too young to suddenly pass away like that. And the absence of his voice is going to be strange, I say this figuratively, agnostic atheist here, but Godspeed, Michael Brooks.